I'll never forget what I saw that morning. The sun had barely peeked over the ridge, casting a soft golden glow on the fields, making it seem like maybe, just maybe, the world would be kind today. But no, there it was. Karen's shiny pearl-white luxury SUV parked squarely in front of my tractor, as if she'd bought the whole farm overnight. To top it off, taped to the hood was a handwritten note in swirly pink ink. Be a sweetheart and don't use the tractor today. I'm having brunch. K. My stomach churned, a mix of disbelief and frustration, and I knew right away that Karen wasn't going to get away with this. I stood there for a while, arms crossed, boots digging into the dirt, staring at that SUV like it might somehow move on its own. But no, it just sat there smugly, reflecting the sunrise as if it owned the place. That tractor wasn't just a piece of machinery, it was my lifeline. It was planting season, and every hour it wasn't in the field meant I was losing money, time, and sleep. Farming isn't a hobby out here. It's survival. Crops don't care about brunch, and neither do the bills that pile up when things go wrong. But clearly Karen hadn't figured that out. I walked up to her front door, doing my best to stay calm, knocked and waited. A few seconds later, the door creaked open, and there she stood, Karen in all her HFY glory, robe tied tight, hair in curlers, holding a steaming cup of coffee like she hadn't just thrown a wrench into my livelihood. She barely looked at me before saying, "Oh, you're early. I thought farmers slept in during the off-season." I told her there was no off-season, that spring planting was why this county even functioned. She just laughed, took a sip of her coffee and said, "Well, I just need you to hold off for today. We have a very important brunch and I can't have tractor noise ruining the view from the patio." Then without another word she shut the door. The heat rose behind my ears, but I gave her the benefit of the doubt. Maybe after her first mimosa she'd come to her senses. I went back to the barn, got the tools ready, paced around, and did everything except punch a wall like I wanted to. Hours passed, the sun climbed higher, and the SUVs for her brunch guests started piling up along the road, each one looking like they'd never held a shovel in their life. But they sure had mastered the art of pretending my working farm was just a pretty backdrop. By noon I checked again, hoping maybe, just maybe, Karen had come to her senses. But no, her SUV was still there mocking me. And there she was too, on her makeshift patio, champagne flute in hand, wearing a sun hat so big it could cast shade on half the county. She saw me, waved like we were old pals, then turned her back as if I were just part of the scenery. That's when it changed. The frustration snapped into something colder, more decisive. I wasn't angry anymore, I was resolute. Karen had parked herself into a problem, and it was time to show her how farm problems get solved. But before I made my move, I gave her one last chance. I walked right up to the edge of her brunch setup, with all the pastel napkins, lemon water pitchers, and garden gnomes trying too hard to look classy. I called out loud enough for her whole circle of guests to hear, "Karen, last chance to move the car." She blinked at me like I was speaking a foreign language, then giggled to her friends. "Oh, Ben's just being dramatic. He loves an audience," she said. But she didn't get it. None of them did. Out here, the dirt isn't for show and the tractors aren't decorations. By sundown, I still hadn't turned the tractor over. And any farmer reading this will understand the weight of that. The weather was rolling in from the west, storms were coming, and the next day was my only chance to plant before the field became a mud pit. I couldn't afford to lose another day to Karen's brunch and her selfies in front of hay bales. That night, I lay awake, tossing and turning. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about every sunrise, every frost, every bill that came due, whether the ground was planted or not. Karen thought this was about noise and scenery. It wasn't. It was about surviving another season, about putting food on the table, not just for me but for everyone who would buy what I harvested. At dawn, I pulled on my boots, drank black coffee like it was fuel, and walked out with a clear purpose. Karen's SUV was still there, smug and white like it had won some kind of battle. She wasn't out yet, but I knew she'd be soon. I backed the tractor up slowly, hooked a tow chain to her rear axle. Not one of those dainty little chains but a serious farm chain. I double-checked the knots and hitch. I wasn't about to damage her car. This wasn't about revenge, it was about results. When I climbed into the tractor seat and looked down at the SUV, I couldn't help but smirk. Karen wanted a view, I was about to give her one she'd never forget. The engine rumbled to life beneath me, steady and sure, like an old friend ready for mischief. The sun hadn't fully risen yet, just casting a soft orange glow across the field. I eased the tractor forward, gentle at first, feeling the weight of Karen's SUV tug against the chain. For a moment, I half expected it to fight back, tires screeching, alarms blaring. But no, it gave in like a spoiled dog on a leash. The chain tightened, creaked, and with a little more throttle, the SUV lurched backward, bumping along as I guided it straight into the open field. It left deep ruts in the dirt as if it belonged nowhere but in the mud. I wasn't even 50 feet into the field before I heard the unmistakable shriek echo across the yard. I looked back and there she was, Karen, still in her ridiculous robe and curlers, one hand clutching a half-spilled mimosa, the other flailing wildly. She wasn't alone. Her brunch crowd stood behind her, mouths agape, some holding up their phones, others too stunned to even sip their orange juice. Karen's voice cracked as she screamed, "You maniac! What are you doing to my car?" I didn't bother answering. The tractor wasn't exactly quiet, and besides, what was there to explain? I was simply moving the obstruction, like any responsible landowner would. Karen sprinted, or at least waddled, with determination, her slippers caked with mud with every step. The sight of her struggling to keep her footing while clutching that glass was almost too much to handle. I could see her cursing, but the only words I caught clearly were, "I'll sue you and this is illegal." I could barely suppress a grin as I slowly turned the tractor, dragging the SUV deeper into the field. The tires began to cake with mud. I wasn't being rough, I was being gentle, taking my time. I didn't want to risk damaging it, I just wanted it parked somewhere more fitting than in front of my tractor. By the time I stopped, the SUV was halfway into the middle of the field, surrounded by churned-up dirt and a patch of soft spring mud that had the tires sinking just enough to make escape nearly impossible. I climbed down from the tractor, wiped my hands on my jeans and waited for Karen to catch up. She finally reached me, gasping for air, specks of mud splattered up her legs. "Are you insane? Do you know who I am?" she sputtered, her face turning a shade of red I hadn't seen since my uncle's prize bull got stung by a wasp. "You can't just steal my car." "I didn't steal it," I said calmly. "I moved it, like you should have done yesterday." She jabbed a trembling finger at me, her anger palpable. "I'm calling the sheriff. You'll regret this." I shrugged and tipped my hat. "Feel free. He'll be here quicker than you think." Sure enough, not 30 minutes later, the familiar sight of a county sheriff's truck kicked up dust down the gravel drive. Karen's eyes lit up, thinking her salvation had arrived. She practically ran to the sheriff, waving her arms and launching into a dramatic retelling of her supposed rural injustice. The sheriff, however, climbed out of his truck, gave me a nod and said, "Morning, Ben." Karen's jaw nearly hit the ground. "You know him?" she gasped. "We're cousins," the sheriff said, adjusting his belt. "Grew up working this very field." He turned to me. "He treating you unfair, Ben?" I shook my head slowly and deliberately. "Just moved an obstruction." "Obstruction?" "He kidnapped my vehicle." Karen sputtered, throwing her arms up in disbelief. The sheriff rubbed his chin, clearly trying not to laugh. "Ma'am, if you parked on his property without permission and he moved it without damaging it, I'm not sure you've got much of a case." Karen's mouth flapped open and shut like a fish out of water. But this is criminal." The sheriff leaned against his truck, perfectly calm. "What's criminal is blocking up a man's work when the forecasts call for rain tomorrow." Karen turned to her brunch crowd for support, but they weren't much help. Most had their phones out recording, probably for their HOA Facebook page, and a few were snickering behind their hands. One lady whispered, "I told you not to park there." Another muttered, "This is better than reality TV." Karen's face flushed a deeper shade of red. "You'll all regret this. Every single one of you," she shouted, storming off toward her house, kicking up mud with every furious step. By the time she disappeared inside, the sheriff and I stood there watching the crowd disperse, most of them laughing as they walked away, taking photos of her poor SUV stranded in the field like a shipwreck. The sheriff clapped me on the shoulder. "She'll cool off," he said, shaking his head. "Probably not," I replied. "But I'm ready for round 2 if it comes." The sheriff chuckled. "Just make sure you keep it legal, or at least fun." And that's exactly what I intended to do. What I didn't know was that Karen wasn't the type to let things go quietly. The next few days would prove that and then some. The SUV sat in the field for most of the day, abandoned like a monument to her pride. But as dusk approached, a tow truck finally came rumbling up the road. Karen supervised the entire extraction like a field general, glaring daggers at me every time I so much as glanced her way. The tow driver kept giving me sideways looks, clearly trying not to laugh. He even tipped his cap as he left. Later that night, sitting on the porch with a cold drink in hand, I thought maybe that was the end of it. Karen would swallow her pride, move on, and life would get back to normal. I'd had my fun, made my point, and maybe, just maybe, she'd think twice before blocking up farm equipment again. But as I sat there listening to the crickets and watching the stars creep out, something deep down told me Karen wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. Karen didn't show her face for 2 full days, which in Karen terms, was practically a ceasefire. The SUV was gone, the brunch crowd had quieted, and the weather held up just enough for me to make some headway on planting. For a moment, I thought the whole thing had passed, that maybe Karen had accepted defeat with the SUV tow and was licking her wounds quietly behind her oversized curtains. I should have known better. Karen wasn't built for quiet. She was built for spectacle. On the 3rd morning, just as I was heading out with the seed drill, I found an envelope tacked to my gate. Inside was a formal complaint from the HOA, printed on embossed stationery, threatening fines, legal action, and even something called a decorum violation. I didn't know what a decorum violation was, and neither did the sheriff when I showed it to him later. Still, it had Karen's fingerprints all over it. The problem? My farm wasn't part of her HOA. Never had been, never would be. I was outside her jurisdiction and she hated that more than anything. Picture Karen pacing in her living room, fuming that her rules held no weight beyond the white picket fences of her little subdivision. I ignored the letter and kept working, but Karen wasn't done. That evening, I noticed a new sign hammered into the edge of my driveway where it met the main road. In big, bold letters, it read, "Private HOA property, no farm equipment beyond this point," complete with the HOA logo slapped on it like some kind of royal seal. I couldn't help but laugh so hard that I had to lean against the fence for balance. Karen was trying to annex the county road now, as if I hadn't been running this land since before she knew what a riding mower was. The next week passed in a strange, tense rhythm. I kept my head down, trying to get as much planting done as I could while keeping an eye out for more nonsense from Karen. The HOA signs multiplied like weeds, popping up along the road and even near the old windmill on my property line. It would have been pathetic if it weren't so bold. But the real trouble came late one night when I noticed headlights flickering in the distance, bouncing around in the field. At first I thought it was just kids joyriding, but when I got closer I realized it was Karen and 2 of her HOA cronies, weaving around in golf carts, ripping through the soft, freshly seeded rows, laughing like teenagers at a bonfire. I gritted my teeth and stayed hidden behind a tree lean, watching as they destroyed half a day's work without a care in the world. They even had wine glasses in hand, toasting with every pass through the rows as if it were a game. I reached for my phone, ready to call the sheriff, but stopped when one of the carts got bogged down in a trench I dug for irrigation. The other 2 carts circled for a bit, but after some half-hearted pushing, they abandoned the cart and sped back toward Karen's house, giggling like they'd pulled off some grand heist. Once they were gone, I walked up to the abandoned golf cart. It was stuck good, wheels half buried and the battery dead. But what really caught my eye was the monogrammed wine glass sitting neatly in the cup holder with Karen's initials on it, like a calling card. I took it back to the house and set it on the kitchen shelf, a trophy of sorts. I didn't need the sheriff's badge to know what to do next. Karen wasn't just trespassing anymore, she was escalating and I wasn't going to let her get away with it. The next morning, instead of replanting the ruined rows, I got creative. I built a series of scarecrows along the edge of the field. But these weren't ordinary scarecrows. Each one wore clothes suspiciously similar to the outfits I'd seen Karen and her friends wear at the HOA meetings: polos, khakis, sun hats, and even one with a little clipboard hanging from its straw hand. Just for good measure, each one had a wooden sign around its neck with some of Karen's most beloved HOA catchphrases: "Noise violations will be reported," "Community standards enforced," and my personal favorite, "This is not up to code." By lunchtime, the wind was swaying them just enough to make it look like they were peering ominously into Karen's backyard. Sure enough, it wasn't long before Karen herself marched down the property line, hands on hips, demanding I remove them. I stayed cool. "Oh, you mean the honorary HOA members? They're just here to supervise," I said, keeping a straight face. Karen fumed, spinning on her heels and stomping back to her house, but not before glancing nervously at the scarecrows, as though they might write her up for a violation. It only got better. I wasn't done yet. That night, under the cover of darkness, I moved the old manure pile from the far side of the barn and placed it just beyond her property line, right where the wind loved to blow straight toward her open windows. I made sure to do it carefully, keeping it technically on my land but close enough for her to smell every last bit of it. When she threw open her windows the next morning, expecting fresh country air, she got something a lot less pleasant. What Karen got instead was a faceful of the unmistakable scent of farm life at its finest. The yelling started immediately. From across the field, I could hear her swearing loud enough to make the crows fly off the fence posts. Of course, she called the sheriff again, this time waving what looked like another HOA charter at him as he pulled up. But the sheriff, bless him, took one sniff, looked at the manure pile, then looked at me and said, "Manure's on his property, Karen. Not much I can do about wind direction." He tipped his hat and left her standing there, her face red with frustration. What Karen didn't realize was that every time she pushed, she gave me more reason to push back. And out here, farmers don't just push back, we make it entertaining. I could see it clearly, the way she glared at the scarecrows every morning, the way the brunch crowd thinned out until only the most loyal HOA diehards showed up, clutching their coffee cups like soldiers in the trenches. Even the neighborhood Facebook page, which I'd managed to sneak a peek at thanks to one of my neighbors, was full of heated debates about manure stench and scarecrow harassment. Karen wasn't beaten yet, but she was flailing, cornered and furious. And I knew one thing for sure, she was about to make things even worse for herself. The real fun hadn't even started. It didn't take long for Karen to show her hand, and when she did, she went all in. A couple of days after the manure debacle, I came back from the feed store to find a certified letter taped to my barn door. She'd officially filed a lawsuit. I half expected it to be another HOA bluff, but this was the real deal. Karen had hired a lawyer, fancy letterhead, legal jargon, the works. She accused me of harassment, property damage, emotional distress, and, in a particularly bold move, sabotaging community harmony. I laughed out loud, standing there with the letter flapping in the wind. Community harmony? She was the one who'd driven a golf cart through my seedlings at midnight like she was in an HOA demolition derby. The best part? I recognized the lawyer's name instantly, Laura Parker. We dated years ago, back when we were both too stubborn for our own good. But we ended on good terms, well enough that I still sent her Christmas cards and she sent me bourbon. Laura hated HOA types, always had. She left town for a while to work in the city, but apparently, Karen had managed to hire her without realizing Laura and I shared history. I could already picture Laura's face when she opened the case file and saw my name. Sure enough, the very next afternoon, Laura's truck came rolling down my drive, dust swirling behind it like an omen. She stepped out, took one look at the field, the scarecrows, the manure pile, and then me leaning against the fence sipping coffee. She burst out laughing. "You're the farmer?" she asked, waving the paperwork at me. I nodded. "Guilty." She shook her head, still chuckling. "You've got Karen riled up like a kicked hornet's nest. I haven't seen anything this petty since law school." I grinned. "I'm just trying to work my land." She grinned right back. "Oh, don't worry. I'll make sure you get to keep doing exactly that." At the hearing a week later, Karen arrived dressed like she was attending the Oscars, dramatic black dress, pearls, and a somber face, like she was about to testify in a murder trial. The courthouse was small, just one courtroom, a dozen spectators at most, but Karen was playing to the imaginary cameras. Laura, calm as ever, let Karen spill every grievance in the book, complete with printed photos of the scarecrows, the manure pile, and of course the infamous tractor tow. Karen waved the photos around like they were damning evidence, each one making the courtroom snicker a little more. Then Laura stood up, cool as a breeze, and dropped the hammer. First, she played drone footage I didn't even know she'd gotten, showing Karen and her friends joyriding through my freshly seeded field. Riding through my fields and causing actual damage, they didn't stop there. Then came the golf cart trench incident, complete with the monogrammed wine glass I'd kept as Exhibit A. Karen's face went from smug to horrified in seconds. But Laura didn't stop there. She showed the court my property lines, clearly outside of HOA jurisdiction, and even found an old county record proving that the so-called HOA private road was still classified as a public right-of-way. Karen's mouth opened like she wanted to object, but no words came out. When the judge dismissed her case with prejudice, I thought Karen might faint right there. But the real twist came when the judge also mentioned that Karen's unauthorized signs and late-night field vandalism had left her open to civil damages if I wanted to press charges. I didn't. Watching her lose was enough. And honestly, I didn't want her money, I just wanted her to stew in the embarrassment. What I didn't expect was how fast word would spread. Within a day, the local news had picked up the story. Some kid's live stream of the tractor tow had racked up millions of views online. Suddenly, people who'd never paid me any mind were stopping by the farm to buy fresh eggs, veggies, and hear the story firsthand. I even started getting online orders from folks halfway across the country. Karen's tantrum had accidentally made me a minor folk hero. But karma wasn't done yet. A few weeks later, I saw a repo truck pulling up to Karen's house. Turns out those legal fees, combined with some unpaid HOA fines from her own neighborhood for unrelated nonsense, had pushed her into financial trouble. The SUV, the very same one I'd towed into the field, was being hauled away for good. I watched from the porch as Karen stood in the driveway, arms crossed, tears threatening but pride holding them back. I didn't feel smug, not exactly. It was more like quiet satisfaction. Actions have consequences. That's farm life, plain and simple. About a month later, I was at a county auction looking for some spare equipment when I spotted it, Karen's SUV, dusty and worn, sitting quietly among the listings. No one wanted it, mostly because word had gotten around about its past. Folks in this town have long memories. I bought it for $200 cash. The best part? I didn't even need it for driving. I converted it into a chicken coop. Took the doors off, put in some roosts, lined it with hay, and let the hens have at it. I named the bossy one Karen. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Every egg I sold after that came with a little smile, knowing full well they were laid in the Karen coop. By the time fall rolled around, Karen had packed up and moved out. Her house sold quietly to a young couple who loved the farm fresh produce and didn't mind the scarecrows one bit. We even joked about naming one after her. I left the manure pile where it was. It had turned into a pretty good compost heap. Life returned to the rhythm it always had: sunrises, hard work, and the occasional coyote howl at night. Still, I wasn't about to let my guard down. Before winter, I installed a set of motion-activated sprinklers along the property line. Not because I thought Karen would come back, but because you never know. Folks like her have a habit of turning up when you least expect it. And wouldn't you know it? The final cherry on top didn't come from Karen, but from fate itself. On moving day, as her rental truck trundled out of town, overloaded and sagging under the weight of what I could only assume was all the nonsense she couldn't sell at a yard sale, the driver tried to cut across my field to avoid the sharp corner by the road. The truck sank axle deep into a patch of soft dirt left over from an irrigation repair. Karen, sitting in the passenger seat, looked out the window and saw me sitting on my porch, cup of coffee in hand, watching it all unfold. I gave her a polite little wave. This time she didn't wave back, but I swear one of the scarecrows seemed to nod.